Good afternoon. I'm Barbara Tinnerman Cecil, and on behalf of Susie Spittler and Tom Beck, I want to welcome you to the 26th Oral History Taping. It is Tuesday, May 13th, 2014, and we will continue our spring series about churches in West Melton. Our first speaker is Al Rourke from the United Church of Christ in West Melton. Al.
Good afternoon. I'm Al Rourke with the West Melton United Church of Christ. I am the moderator. I am an ordained minister, but at this time I just act as a moderator for the church. I will be presenting the history of the West Melton United Church of Christ, and since 1820 the church has gone through many changes. We've had several locations and several preachers. In 1820, the first covenant was called the Christian Church, Ludlow Creek. And the second covenant was in 1837. Elder John Williams began in Fouts Schoolhouse at the corner of State Route 571 and Eddings Road. And that building is still in existence today. The third covenant was in 1845. The West Union Christian Church started across the road from the schoolhouse. In January 1860, the West Union Christian Church purchased the present church building from the United Presbyterian people who were unable to complete the building. Poor roads, travel conditions were the reasons for moving to the present location. The new building was dedicated in August 1860. They paid $600 for the lot, unfinished building, and all the unused lumber. When completed, the building cost $2,000. The West Union Church then became Nashville Church, and this church became the Milton Church. On June 6, 1885, the church wrote the second covenant and became the West Melton Christian Church. The same year, Angie Crew began her service after graduating from Defiance College. In 1923, Angie Crew sailed for Japan to begin her missionary journey. For the first 5 years, Angie learned to fluently speak the Japanese language. In 1940, the church changed from West Melton Christian Church to the West Melton Congregational Christian Church. And during World War II, 35 of the members of the church, including the preacher, Reverend Irwin Hyde, left West Melton to go to war. Reverend Hyde was a decorated chaplain. After the war, he returned to West Melton to serve as minister for another 2 years before leaving for another congregation. In 1945, the church celebrated 100 years of service to the community. In February 1961, the youth group presented tickets as a gift to Pastor Alexander Carlson and his wife to travel to the Holy Land, a dream fulfilled for the couple. During 1963 and 1964, the Congregational Christian Churches, the Evangelical and Reformed Churches, and Ohio Conference, made up of 11 associations, and 4 synods became the United Churches of Christ, Ohio Conference, and 5 associations. West Melton Congregational Christian Church became West Melton United Church of Christ in 1963. In 1966, the church organized a building committee to expand the church. Reverend Falsey was pastor at this time, and the youth were encouraged to buy bricks by working, and the church purchased 2 properties to the south and added a wing for classrooms and social hall. In 1973, Dick Van Tyne was called to serve as pastor. Also in 73, the church purchased a lot and a house at the corner of Main and Front Street across from the church. The house was rented but later sold, and they kept the parking lot. In 1974, the church started working with the ARC of Miami County. The ARC is for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The work has been going on for over 40 years. A gift from Eula Wheelock gave the church the last house at the corner of Main and 2nd Street. This area became the church's side parking lot. At this time, the church began the Cincinnati Mission, Camp Washington, which helped pay the pastor's salary, helped with repairs, collected Christmas donations, and provided summer camp for children. The church had a men's group called Gingrech's Old Goats. They were a group that had retired from jobs and were kept busy with keeping the church in repair, working with Cincinnati Mission, and projects at the farm. And the farm belonged to Reverend Van Tyne and was used for retreats for both adults and youth down in southern Ohio. They also created the Place in the basement of the church for youth. Place stands for people lovingly accepting Christ eternally. The church purchased an old school bus to transport our youth and the youth in Cincinnati to many adventures. Our church hosted the Township Christmas Bazaar for many years with food available at Granny's Kitchen provided by our Women's Fellowship. For over 30 years, the church and the West Milton Lions Club has worked with the Community Blood Bank. There has been a blood drive every 8 weeks in the social hall of the church, and there has been over 300 gallons of blood drawn during these years. The church was very busy during Pastor Van Tyne's years. The Advanced Club, TAC, which was a group of seniors, provided lunches to the church and others in the months of March, October, and December. And they enjoyed trips by bus and mission trips to Haiti. In 1987, the church during the service had held a special service to burn the mortgage from all remodeling. That was approximately $115,000. In 1995, the church celebrated 150 years of service to the community. 8 of the past ministers helped Pastor Gary Minnick in this celebration. In 2000, the church celebrated 25 years of serving Mount Washington UCC in Cincinnati Mission. In October 2005, the church celebrated their 160th anniversary. The church honored Reverend Richard Van Tyne as the pastor emeritus. In December 2005, the church sponsored the first Ark of Miami County Christmas party. Every year since, there has been a party with food, games, presents, and Santa Claus for all the clients. They always have a great time, and it's very rewarding for the workers that volunteer to help. In 2007, the facility was opened to public preschool. In October 2008, Mark Moore was installed as the designated pastor, and Mark served until May 31st, 2013. In December 2009, the Milton Union Council of Churches Holiday Helping Hands program moved to the church's social hall. One comment that came from the community was, "Dear friends, this year the churches and community have been more generous than any year previous on record, and for this we are truly thankful." In 2010, the West Milton Lions Club, the West Milton Rotary, and the Cub Scouts started using the church facilities for their meetings. In 2011, the facility was made available to the Women's Interfaith Bible Study to meet on the first and third Tuesday of each month. In 2013, the Batty Binders Quilting Club started meeting in the church social hall on the first Wednesday of each month with occasional all-day Saturday programs. Our facility is very flexible. We have round tables for parties and celebrations, rectangle tables for meetings, etc. Pretty much anyone can use our facility, including the sanctuary for weddings. Any event needs to be scheduled and necessary paperwork completed. Starting June 2013, the church began a search process and had a variety of pulpit supply and special programs. In December, Aaron Hefner was asked to provide pulpit supply. He filled the pulpit several times, and in February 2014, he was asked to be interim pastor. We look forward to continued growth and providing an outreach service to the West Milton community and beyond. Thank you very much for allowing me to share our church's history with you. And I will pass it on to our next speaker.
Hello, I'm Jean Hoover, and I'm from what was formerly Sugar Grove Bible Church, and it's now the Covenant at Sugar Grove. I'm going to give you a brief outline of our history, and then I will share some of my special memories of my church. In 1850, 2 traveling evangelists held protracted meetings on the Furnace Road area, which is just east of Frederick Pike in Montgomery County. And it's just south of where our present church is now located. The people in attendance decided they wanted their own church, so John Furnace donated land from his farm, and a building was erected, and the church organized August 18, 1850. The members built a new church on land donated by the Points family in 1878, and it's located now on Kessler Frederick Road. Many groves of maple trees were in the area, thus the name Sugar Grove Church. In 1931, the church merged with the Congregational Christian denomination. In 1946, a basement was dug under the original building for a kitchen and classrooms. In 1957, the Congregational Christian denomination disbanded, and Sugar Grove became an independent community church. Pastor Ivan B. Chafer came as a temporary pastor and was asked to stay on, and he was there for more than 20 years. In 1957, the Congregational Christian denomination and Sugar Grove became an independent community church. I read that before. In 1963, an addition was added to the back of the original building, which included an all-purpose room, kitchen, Sugar Grove, and Sunday school classrooms and office. In 1966, the church changed its name to Sugar Grove Bible Church and became an independent church. In 1967, Sugar Grove decided to build a Christian school, so it was established with 8 children enrolled. In 1972, an additional building consisted of a church auditorium and 8 classrooms were built to handle the increased enrollment. In 1973, Sugar Grove Christian School was accredited by the state of Ohio. In 1978, with growth occurring in both the church and the school, another addition of 4 classrooms were built, attaching the 1972 and the 1978 building together. In 1984, the Sugar Grove Christian School merged with Dayton Christian School. In 2001, Dayton Christian School left the Sugar Grove location. 2003, classrooms were taken out to make way for a fellowship hall. And in 2004, we updated and remodeled the auditorium. In 2005, a new kitchen was installed and the auditorium was complete. In 2011, Sugar Grove Bible Church merged with the Covenant Church, and our name is now the Covenant at Sugar Grove Church. Now, some of my memories, naturally I don't go back to 1850, but I go back a long time. I've been a member there all my life. My mother took me there when I was a baby. My husband and I were married there. Our children have went there all of their lives, and 2 of them still now attend there, and 2 others are in other denominations close by. My first memory, I think, of my church was of going to Bible school there. And we would meet in the front of the building, and we would all march in singing Onward Christian Soldiers. And I can still see myself doing that, and it's a good memory. We had many activities for our teens in the youth years. We were very active in Youth for Christ. And we also had a very active men and women's softball league. We played at Nashville Ballpark, which is just down the road from us, and at least 2 nights a week, sometimes 3. And that was always fun, and several local churches were involved in those teams, so we played the local churches in the area. Our children attended the Christian school when it was formed, and I can remember the first classes were held in the basement of the old building. And our son Todd, I put boots on him when it was really rainy because I knew there would be dampness in the basement, actually water in low spots. And you couldn't get away with that today, but they had good teaching. Some of the classes were also held in the church parsonage, and my daughter was involved in that. We had live nativity scenes at our church for many years, and I don't know if this is kind of a dark picture, but we would take turns standing out in the nativity scene. Many people would stop by. They would come in for hot chocolate and cookies, and one of the gals would make a gingerbread house, and there was just a lot of fellowship and socializing at that time in the church. And we would put luminaries, and the luminaries would go from Miami County Line Road to Garland Road, and we'd use milk jugs and have candles, and the elders and the deacons would walk down and relight if any of them blew out. So it really was a big deal in our little community of Frederick. The neighbor up the street furnished the live donkey. Our son-in-law furnished the calf, and another neighbor furnished the sheep. And my husband built a little crib, and we used a large doll baby for the baby Jesus. And many of the women in the church, we made the uniforms, the robes, and it was just a good time. We had ice cream socials on the front lawn of the church, and we started out with homemade ice cream and pie, and people would bring their lawn chairs. We'd have entertainment on the deck of our church. And I have a picture here that this is of the old church, and the entertainers would play on the deck, and people would have their chairs in front of it, and then they could eat their pie and ice cream and socialize and listen to the old-fashioned gospel music. And let's see, baptisms were held down in the creek on the south side of the church. And we had an amphitheater down there that one of the Christian school teachers, it was her idea, so the kids could have programs down there. And my son, one of my sons was baptized in that creek. We had Easter sunrise services very regularly, and they were really a sunrise service. You got down there not at 8:30 and had breakfast. You got there at 7 o'clock sometimes, and then you had breakfast afterwards. And one particular Sunday, I can remember that we had built the last edition of the 4 classrooms, and we took our chairs and sat outside on that platform, and then the buildings were it was finished later that summer. So there's just a lot of good memories. Let's see, when we built the new auditorium, we still had the old auditorium, or sanctuary is what we used to call them, and we would hold the mother-daughter banquets in there, and Tuesday night was community night for the little town of Frederick, and we would have open volleyball. And on Friday night, we would have open gym nights for the community. And one of our elders in the church, he chaired a holiday basketball tournament for several years. And the school also used this area for the cafeteria and gym time. And we named our old sanctuary the Snell Chapel after one of the elders in the church. And I still, even today, I'll still talk about the Snell Chapel. And there are a lot of good memories. In fact, that's where my husband and I were married, in the Snell Chapel. In the earlier days, the women would gather, and they called it the Ladies' Aid Meeting. And I also have a picture of this. And this I think was taken, I found this in my mother's belongings. She passed away this past February, and I was going through her things. And I think this was taken in the 1950s. So it's a pretty old picture, and it kind of shows you just what a group that we had, a nice group that we had. Another memory I have is of the harvest dinners that we would have, and these dinners were held on the north side of the church. And the way we cooked it, we bought new aluminum trash cans, and we built a campfire out on the side, and we cut up cabbage and potatoes and carrots and sausages and cooked it in the afternoon, and then had a harvest meal in the evening. We've always pitched in. There's been a lot of sweat equity in our church through the years, and we would hold work days to accomplish the goals that we felt were needed at the time. And our primary mission is to proclaim the gospel of Christ and to teach about the Lord and His Word and the saving grace of Jesus. I think that's all, so I'm going to turn this over to my good friend Gail Cope, and which she is now Covenant at Sugar Grove.
Hello, I'm Gail Cope, as Jean said, and it's kind of exciting as you hear these stories put together. I was one of the founders of the Covenant Church when we began back in 2005, so I'll give you just a little bit of the history on that side of the aisle, and then we'll see how the Covenant at Sugar Grove came to be. But in 2005, there were many of us looking for a church to worship in. We were kind of displaced at the time and trying to find some place to worship and just weren't finding what we were looking for. So we had a picnic at the Brookville picnic ground, whatever you call it, picnic ground. And there were about 200 of us there, and we were talking about how much we missed each other and how much we wish we were back worshiping together, and where are you going and how's that, and where are you going and how's that. And we thought, what about if we put a Bible study together? So we said, okay, we'll try to put a Bible study together on a Sunday evening. Would you all come? And everybody said, oh yeah, that would be just terrific. So we asked Pastor Jody McGuire, who had been a pastor for many, many years, if he would be willing to conduct a Bible study for us. And he said, sure. So in June of 2005, we were able, the Lord is just so amazing how he has provided from us all along. We were able to use the Vandalia Rec Center on Sunday evenings to have our Bible studies. So as we progressed, we had close to 200 people coming to Bible studies on Sunday evening, and we were fellowshipping and just enjoying ourselves, the teaching of the Word, which we all were hungering for, and just to be able to see each other again and kind of catch up. So we started saying, this seems a little bit more than a Bible study. We'd like to see if this could go any further. So there was a small group who met regularly and prayed and sought the Lord's will on what he would have us to do. And in July, we again went to Pastor Jody and we asked him if he would consider being the senior pastor of this church that we really believed that the Lord was going to birth. And he prayed about it and thought about it and finally came back to us and said, yes, he would do that. So in August of 2005, we had our first official church service, again, at the Vandalia Rec Center. And we thought, well, we'll probably be at the rec center for maybe a year. Well, in 2011, we were still at the rec center. So we had been looking for a place to have our own space. We were grateful to be at the rec center because we had a marvelous time of worship on Sunday mornings. We had great facilities for our kids, but we didn't have room for adult Sunday schools. We didn't have the convenience of having carry-in meals after church. We wanted to have Wednesday evening services. We wanted to have baptism in our own church. We wanted to do weddings in our own church. We wanted to minister out of our own church. And we looked at a few places and nothing seemed to work out properly. While we were at the rec center, we had lots of new beginnings, as any startup does. You know, we had Sunday school class for our kids. We had youth classes for our teenagers, 6th grade and up. And we had a lot of small groups in homes because we couldn't have Sunday school. And we maintained beautifully. We had a choir. It was just wonderful. We were doing well, and we felt very, very blessed. In 2011, Darla and Ron Peck, who were members of the Covenant Church, and Jean and Ted Hoover, who were members of Sugar Grove Bible Church, got together and started talking about what their situations were at the time. And Sugar Grove was losing membership. We were looking for a home, and we thought, how would this work? How would this work? So the Sugar Grove Bible Church met with their board and talked about it and voted then to talk with our board. And so the two boards got together and talked about a merger and how would that work and made sure that our belief systems matched and that things would go smoothly. And so on November 9th of 2011, the merger took place. And it went so smoothly, and everyone really felt a part of each other, I think, from the beginning. There were adjustments, of course, but it has been, I think, just a marvelous, marvelous venture. We began renovating the church at the property on Kessler Road. The chapel that Jean showed you was demolished, as well as another building, which was very, very sad. But we kept stained glass windows from the old church. We kept a cross that Jean's husband had made. Here's a stained glass window. And what we have done was we've put the stained glass windows in the sanctuary of the church and in the lobby of the church. So you can still see the beauty of them, marvelous stained glass windows. And the cross that Jean's husband Ted had made is at the front of the sanctuary. So we began worshiping there. It was February 3rd, 2013. And that was a very exciting day for all of us to come together And our name became the Covenant at Sugar Grove. So we tried to blend the name there. And again, we started all kinds of firsts in this year of 2013. We had a new board of elders and deacons, and we had a new Sunday school classes, and we had a new worship director, and we had Awana that we had wanted to have for a long, long time and couldn't have Awana. And now we have up to 60 young kids on Wednesday evenings learning to know about Jesus Christ on Wednesday evenings. That's a thrilling thing to do. Our sixth grades to senior high schools have Sunday schools in the morning, and then they also meet on Sunday evening for what they call Sunday Night Live. And they have Bible study, and they have fellowship, and they have games, and they do those kind of things on Sunday nights. We have Wednesday night service where Pastor Jody teaches. We just finished a series called Discerning the Times, which is extremely wonderful. And then we have fellowship groups that also meet. We study for an hour, and then we have fellowship groups afterward where we get to know each other a little bit better. We have Welcome to the Family classes quarterly, where people that have been attending the church but maybe don't know the real workings of it, how it's governed, what that's all about, will come to the Welcome class and be introduced to people and find out a little bit more in depth about what the church is about. We're a very missions-minded church. We support about 14 international ministries. We support a number here in the Dayton area. Some of those are Operation Rebirth, Target Dayton. We go to support at the Ohio State University. It's called Building Bridges. It's a part of Campus Crusade, international part of them. We take a meal up there quarterly. Our youth go on mission trips. They go to the Dominican Republic every other year, where they do Bible school and sports camps for the kids at the Dominican. Every March, there's a group of our congregation that travels to the Dominican again with SCORE International on medical missions trips, which is just a marvelous time again to get to see what God is doing and how he can use you in significant ways, even if you're not a medical professional. There's all kinds of behind-the-scene things to do, and that's fun and wonderful. We also have had this year just wonderful times. We had our first Seder meeting, Seder meal in 2013, which was a wonderful part of our Holy Week. We had Stations of the Cross on Good Friday. And what that did for us, I'm a very visual person. And instead of just hearing about what Christ went through, to have those objects there that you could touch and feel, you could hear the sounds, it was a very moving and dynamic thing for us. We have a ministry called the Prayer Shawl Ministry at our church, where they make prayer shawls for anyone in the congregation who is ill, having surgery, family members. We make things for the Children's Medical Center and take them down there for the infants when they need them. Wonderful. We have discipleship classes. We have evangelism classes. We have apologetics classes. Lots of ways that we can be encouraged to learn about the Word and how to make it practical in our lives. Our goal is to become more conformed to the image of our Savior and to represent him well in the marketplace. So it's been a venture, a long venture in some ways, and yet a very short venture in others. And we're very, very thrilled to be in this community. It's nice for us to have a neighborhood to be working in, and we've done walkthroughs through the neighborhood and passing out information. We went caroling this winter, and that was wonderful. Carol to our neighbors. It was very good. So if any of you are inclined and would like to stop out and take a look at us, come on out and check us out. We'd be grateful to have you come. So thank you very much, and I'll pass it on to the next guest.
Okay. I'm learning a lot here. I wondered why they had torn down their old building over there, so now we know. Mm-hmm. I'm Virginia Daum. I'm from Transfiguration Catholic Church. I'm their Director of Religious Education. I started volunteering after I moved back in the area in 1983. I made the mistake of accepting an invitation to teach the 8th grade class. I thought, what could go wrong? was hired on it as their director of religious education in 2000 after we expanded our staff. The story of our parish actually begins back in the late 40s. There were some religious sisters went through the area and took a survey, and they found there were 72 Catholic families in the area. It was a long way to go back into Dayton in those days to attend church on Sundays. So it was enough to start a mission parish. And they were planning a lot of mission parishes, and they all had the same type of little white buildings. They were designed by religious brothers, so we looked like Sacred Heart in New Carlisle and St. Teresa's in Covington. Our godfather parish, you might call them, was Corpus Christi in Dayton. And in 1943 and 1944, they took up a Christmas collection of $12,000 cumulative, which was a lot of money during those days during the war. They actually didn't start any construction until 1949. There were Harry and Herb Bussey had started a pony farm, and they deeded the land over then to the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and they were allowed to start construction on the church with a loan, in addition to that $12,000 from Corpus Christi, this of $43,240, which was an enormous amount of money in those days, but peanuts today. The building was finished on Sunday, August 27th, 1950, and there were 500 people there at the dedication. Not all of them, of course, were parishioners, but the parishes north of Dayton were celebrating that they had planted a new church. 3 months later, as anyone who's lived in this town will tell you who's of a certain age, they had the Great Blizzard. And in 1950, the telephone exchange went down. There was no way to contact parishioners. And Catholic churches don't usually cancel services on Sunday, but we, along with all the Protestant churches in town, didn't have Sunday services. And there was one in November, and then it hit again in December. And the only reason I know that is my mother was very pregnant with me at the time and got caught out in the blizzard. And someone took her in over in Haber Road, and she was there for 2 whole days. They weren't any better at plowing roads back then than they are now. We didn't have a resident pastor. We shared Monsignor Harry Ansberry with Corpus Christi for 2 years, and we got our first permanent pastor in October 1952 with Father Michael Henson. He was a retired chaplain. He was a colonel in the Army, and he came to us, and out of his own funds, he bought a trailer so the pastor would have a rectory to stay in. That was the first rectory. He had a housekeeper, Margaret Kuhn. She lived at the rectory as housekeeper and cook and general listening ear. And over the next 7 years, the church would add a wing with a kitchen and 2 additional wings so that we could have instructions in the faith for our young people. And from that time on, we were always out of room. The parish had its first festival in 1952 on the parish grounds, and there really wasn't appropriate. You had to put up tents. So the next year, they went to Miller's Grove, and no one was watching that the roasters had an electrical short. So at noon, they're all ready to serve the meal, and they found out the chicken was still raw. So Frank and Katie and Joe and Irene Toth came to the rescue the next year. They were parishioners, and they owned Hillside Manor, which is no longer in existence. It's down there where the Eagles is, south of town now. So for years, they had the parish festival down there with a lot of fun. And they were great cooks. They were famous for their cabbage roll dinners, and there were a lot of people from West Milton came down to join in the fun. 1 year was memorable. We had a big windstorm, and their booze just about blew away, and the men went charging down towards the Stillwater River to get the fancy goods, the embroidered things, the tiles and stuff that the ladies had at the festival. So the men went down there and chased them. Another year, one of the kids must have let loose the helium balloons, and they had a big tent up down there. And Al Frantz, who was one of the founding members of the parish, led an impromptu race up the poles with the men to try and get the helium balloons back down. Father Mike gave 11 years to the parish, and 2 days before Christmas in 1963, he died suddenly. We had several interim pastors, and then finally we had Father Robert Plaguey in 1964. He was already ill when he came to us, so he only served about 2.5 years. As I remember, all the kids were astonished because he smoked, and we didn't know that priests were allowed to smoke. We had a first parish council in the 1960s. There was a lot of ferment with Vatican II. We went from saying Mass in Latin to in English. We had lay people taking up more responsibilities. We had ordained the first son of the parish, Father Al Naisman, who was a precious blood missionary priest, so we didn't get to keep him for the archdiocese. We had precious blood sisters who were well known in the area. They taught kids on Saturday. We didn't have room for Sunday school, so we had Saturday school for about 2.5 to 3 hours on Saturdays. The original church building was growing too small for us, so in December 1967, 166 parishioners pledged $114,000 toward construction of a new church building. They had to borrow first $70,000 and then another $150,000, and the cost would end up exceeding $330,000 to build the new church. They had a lot of cost overruns, but it was the 1970s. One of the problems that we've had ever since is somebody designed a flat roof, which we would never ever do again. And everybody says if they win the lottery, we'll build a new church, and it definitely will have a peaked roof on it like the Church of the Brethren next door. The first Mass in the 575-seat church was held April 11th on 1971. In between then, we had Father Fritz, who oversaw the building of the church, and that's always an onerous duty for a pastor because there's all that financial responsibility and raising the funds, as anybody who's a pastor of any church knows. We had Father Wilford Deere came. He was only with us a year before he suddenly died. And the funny story about that is one of our original parishioners was Mrs. Mary O'Brien, and she told about that winter. He was only with us a year, and it was a really bad winter, and the front steps of the old church were really iced up. And she decided to help him clear the steps off. And in doing so, she slipped from the top step, and she fell on him as he rolled down, and she landed on top of him in the bottom step. And as Mary said, well, he died a couple months later, but I don't think it had anything to do with my fall. We received from the Archdiocese Father George Klein as our 5th pastor on August 22nd, 1973, and it was that year that the parish hosted the first ecumenical prayer service in the history of Union Township. 13 ministers participated and more than 350 people attended. By 1974, the parish had grown to 350 families, and there were 7 weddings in the church that year and 40 baptisms. We had a ball diamond, there was an athletic club, they still are in existence, and there was a lot of ecumenical activities, a lot of Bible studies for spiritual enlightenment, and a lot of new things being done. And that was the year Father Klein introduced the white mice races to the parish festival, and he raised them in the rectory. Father Klein knew more about growing a church than growing mice, and some of the mice escaped and took over the rectory. And he didn't mind, but when he was transferred to Holy Trinity Church in Middletown in October of 1979, along with his white socks and his Hawaiian shirts, and I should mention that was the reign of purple ink. If you look back in our church record books, anytime we have to look up a baptism or a wedding and see what year it was, if it was purple ink, we know it was Father Klein. He only bought purple ink pens for the parish. His successor was Father Charles Caserta, and he declared war on the mice. He didn't know he had mice. No one had told him. And he was sitting in his easy chair the one night reading the paper, and he happened to look up, and he thought he saw something running across the floor, and lo and behold, he had the white mice infestation. And he called in our maintenance man at that time. I think it was Ed Brinkle, who owned the B&B, later to be the IGA, said, "Ed, we have a problem." And the next thing you know, they were carrying a couch out of the rectory on the front hood of the car and dumping it over the hill. They've since retrieved the couch. The Boy Scouts, or we have a Boy Scout troop, 972, and they cleaned up the couch. But it had been down there for several years hosting the mice. And ever since then, we've had a lot of neighborhood cats visit, so we don't know if the mice prospered down there or not. Father Caserta was also known for his cooking skills. He put on spaghetti dinners. He was the only pastor we've ever had who knew how to cook. He grew up in a restaurant in Piqua, and his brother Angelo Caserta is also a pastor, and he marketed a tomato sauce, a spaghetti sauce, through Tip Top Canning for a number of years. Both of them are still alive and kicking and still cooking great meals up. It was during that time we acquired our first two ordained deacons, Robert Huffman Sr. and Francis Wheelock, both since deceased. And Father Caserta kind of made history with the town cops. He was a very early riser. He liked to get up at 4 or 5 in the morning and pray, and then he would go out to the local grocery, he'd get his newspaper, and while he was there, he dropped some of the quarters on the ground, and unbeknownst, while he was picking them up, bumped against the door, and he set the alarm off, and the next thing he knew, he was surrounded by the local police. There was a lot of financial stress during Transfiguration. Parishioners were still paying on the debt for the new building. The bills were piling up. The flat roof was leaking, and they was leaking faster than our all-around maintenance man and Brinkle could repair them. So after seeing the first utility bill, we have services during the week, and Father Caserta moved them into the rectory for a number of years. We also had another would-be maintenance man who he liked to volunteer, but his skills weren't quite what they should have been. His name was John Mowry, God rest his soul. He's also since deceased. And Father Caserta gave him the job of painting the restrooms in the old church building, which had now become our Faith Formation Center. And unbeknownst to him, he also painted the toilet seats. And we found that out because one of our longtime members, Monica Franz, went in to use the bathroom, and she was stuck to the seat. So Father Caserta worked tirelessly to retire the debt, and he finally did in 1989. And he decided, since it was always the same people doing the parish festival, that everybody should contribute. So he got out in front of the congregation and he says, why don't you all just chip in a few more bucks and we won't have to have a parish festival anymore. Everybody nodded their heads, thought that was a good idea, and the collection went up and we didn't have to have a parish festival anymore and have volunteers for it. And it's been that way ever since. Anytime Father's needed some extra cash, he gets up in front and says, you need to dig a little deeper, and it's always been there. As Father Caserta used to say, God has all the money. In lieu of the parish festival, though, we had a men's society, the Holy Name Society, and they started fish fries. As the men got older, they finally decided to turn it over. It's been, I think, 11 years ago, so it's now lay people that do it. We've also had a Rosary Alder Society for the ladies, and I don't know quite what year it is. I only remember as a kid, the ladies liked to get together and just talk after they'd have their mother-daughter banquet, and all of us girls would go back and hit the dessert table, and we have a lot of great cooks, and we'd always go home well sugared up, much to our mother's chagrin. We're still having the mother-daughter banquet. In fact, that will be this Wednesday. Father Caserta instituted a married couples group to strengthen marriage. He worked on weekly services. We have benediction on Thursdays, and we invite anybody from the community that wants to stop in to pray, they can. We had, during 2 different Lutheran pastors, we had a common Ash Wednesday service with Good Shepherd Lutheran, and we also gathered together in an ecumenical study group, both to see what united us and what divided us as Christians. Father Caserta retired in 1994. He still comes periodically to do masses, a lot of funerals. A lot of times people want him to do a wedding or a funeral. And Catholic pastors don't really get to retire. They just don't have administrative duties anymore, but they're still called upon to help at other parishes. Our new pastor was Father Thomas Grillio. He had a PhD in mathematics from Duke University, and he taught at Penn State. And we used to get calls at the parish, and they want Dr. Grillio, and we'd go, who? Because he didn't bother to tell anybody he was also a professor. He had a great heart for the poor. We had a lot of mentally ill people from Dayton would show up at the parish, and he'd known them at previous postings. And he was just well known for that, and he was just a wonderful man. He died 2 years ago of cancer. He fought cancer for a number of years, and he was pastor at St. Mary's in Piqua and just kept on in the traces like a lot of our pastors do, both Catholic and Protestant. He also had a very dry sense of humor, which he was well known for, and we have a little religious articles case for the home, Bibles and catechisms and things that you can purchase. And we had crucifixes. And the parish secretary at the time said, Father Grillo, what's the matter with these? Jesus on one looks kind of brown and he looks kind of pink in the other. Without blinking an eye, as he walked into the rectory, he goes, well, he's been dead longer on one than on the other. And we're like, huh? And he would do this all the time. We had two men of the parish become priests in the 1980s, Father Ken Hummel and Father Kevin McCabe. We also had several young ladies join religious orders. One of them, our former youth minister, is now a vocations director for the Franciscans in New York, and they worked with the poorest of the poor. One of the highlights was we took 11 young ladies up to see her religious order when she made her formal profession of vows. And they all wanted to go see the sights in New York, and the convent is in the Bronx. So we go across the river into the Bronx, and we had another religious sister from the parish with us, Sister Bridget McCabe, and she said, okay, lock your doors, because the first thing we saw was a drug deal going down in the street with the cops there, and it looked like something that you see on the TV. But she continues to work there with the poorest of the poor. We also have another religious sister who just this May will take her formal vows. It's Katie Sparky, now Sister Miriam Caritas, and her order works with indigenous Americans and Hispanic down in New Mexico and in South Dakota and also in Texas, again serving the poorest of the poor. And our parish also has a connection with an Indian mission on the Navajo reservation, and that's been going on for at least the last 20 years. Our big deal was on April 16, 1997, Catherine Lange, a 93-year-old parishioner, died and left the parish a considerable legacy. First of all, her estate, 168 acres on Calumet Road. The parish was shocked and surprised to know that they've been left the property in her will. And she stipulated three purposes. We can't use the proceeds from the trust that funds the estate for the parish. It has to be used for the estate. It was to fund a retirement village for Catholic priests. The house was to be a retreat center of some type, and then a nature conservancy area for most of the acreage. The house was in very poor repair when we got it, so a lot of money was spent refurbishing it, and they built 5 duplexes, which we've kept filled with retired priests who also serve other parishes in the area. None of them really get to retire. One indirect benefit was the reappearance of we have adoration angels, they're statues, and they'd been stored at Catherine Lange's house. Nobody knew it. She wanted to save them. She didn't like that. When they built the new church, they got rid of all the extraneous statuary that we had. So we decided we would put them back in front on either side of the tabernacle, so they're back in the front of the church again. We also have the original crucifix in the center of the sanctuary, and 2 years ago they were decorating and they kind of broke off Jesus's arm, and they band-aided it and nobody quite noticed, and our business manager said, we really need to fix that. Where are we going to get a new one? So we went on the internet and found over in Pennsylvania somebody who has a treasure trove of religious articles, and they went over and they got a new crucifix or a new corpus for the crucifix and put it up, and nobody's ever noticed the difference. They had to be told that we had a new one up there, that we broke the old one. Everybody was aghast because that was part of the original church, and there was some emotional attachment to everything in the original church because they were items donated by parishioners. Father John McQuarrie is the 8th pastor at Transfiguration. He came to us in July 1999. He's our longest-serving pastor, and he will be leaving us this July to go to St. Bernard's over in Springfield, and he'll probably take over St. Teresa's too, we believe. But the shock was a lot of our Catholic parishes are serving, or a lot of our pastors are serving 2 parishes, and we thought we would go together with St. Patrick's in Troy because we do a lot of activities with St. Patrick's. But the Archbishop, because of the Lange estate that has to be administered, and the priests that are retired out there, they have health needs that have to be seen to, we're getting a new pastor, which was a total surprise. So we haven't met him yet. It's Father Eric Bowman, who is from Holy Rosary in Dayton, and he administers, I think, 3 parishes in addition to that. The Archdiocese has called upon us to do a lot of things with lay people now. They said it's time for us all to grow up. It's always been Father will do it. That's just been a Catholic thing. The pastor's supposed to do it all. And He said, no, you lay people need to grow up and take over some duties. So we now have a business manager who does some of the administrative duties. We have finance counsel. We no longer haven't had for years, had religious sisters doing faith formation. It's all volunteers. So we have about 130 children on average come on Wednesday evenings. That's preschool through grade 8. They also do all the confirmation prep, all the first communion prep. We have adults who do faith formation. We hired a youth minister back in '96 who does the high school kids, and we remodeled the old church building, and part of it's classrooms, part of it's a youth center. And we have Danny Schneibel as our current youth minister, and he does that with their young high schoolers on Sunday nights. We simply don't have enough room to have all the kids there during the week. We've instituted a lot of changes. We have lay people leading grief support groups and Bible studies, doing in-home visitation, which used to be just father went and saw everybody, but when you've got a larger parish, he can't get around to everybody. He still does all of our sacramental things, going to the hospitals and conducting funerals. But we now have lay people can do a service of the word with communion. I'm one of them, along with 3 other men. They can also do funerals if we don't have a mass or the pastor's away. I know Father John was in sabbatical in Rome for 3 months, so we had to have lay people taking up a lot of the slack. So it's more, we're still growing, but we have a lot more lay participation, and that's good. With that, I will turn it over to the next person.
My name is Carl Trimble, and I am with Community Grace Brethren Church, a.k.a. the Chicken Church, south of town. We were started in 1969, so we're the youngest of the churches in the district, in the area. And by a bunch of men, Parker Bowman from West Milton here, Harold and Jean Dittmer, their father was around this area, and a man named Dale Denlinger and Harry Denlinger, who had a meat market south of town. And some other men all got together and decided we start a church. And so we met, first of all, and I was part of that group that met, went to the Inglewood Elementary School for 6 months or so, something like that. Then we went to the Allwood Nature Center and was there a year and a half. And we, amazingly enough, grew to about 80, 85 people. And then we bought 30 acres south of town down here where we're at right now, and commissioned a pastor, and he came, and we had some temporaries up to that point, built a building. I don't know if many of you remember, there was this rather small building, just the main sanctuary there, then it had an educational wing. And then the pastor got sick after about 2 or 3 years, had to get out of the ministry, so he moved on, and we brought another man in September of 1973. And Pastor Ron Picard started many ministries in the church. The church grew. We built a 2-story educational wing. We had a busing ministry going all through the area, bringing in, on a Sunday morning, bringing something like 200 children into the church down there. Started 5-day DVS, 3 hours every morning for 5 days in a row. That's where the chicken, there's a man in a church, I forget his name. He was a construction man, tore down a chicken place up in the Piqua area and hauled this fiberglass chicken down to us and said, well, since we're having a Bible school and we're going to attract children, here's a chicken. Okay, so and the chicken's been stolen 3 or 4 times. We found him in the ditches, we found him here, found him there, but we've always brought him back. He'll be out here in another couple of weeks, but that was established the Bible school. When the chicken went up, the Bible school was very shortly thereafter. Also missions, foreign missions was established under his ministry, and outreach to the community. We had a children's church, which I was a part of about 160 total on an average. And that went on for about 9 years. And then he was associated with the Grace Brethren churches up in Winona Lake, and he went back up to him as a staff member up there. And so we brought another man in, and in that process, we built the main sanctuary in 1999, you see down there now. We built several rooms within the complex. Like all churches that you build piecemeal like that, when you go into the church, it's just a maze. I mean, you go here and you go there, et cetera, et cetera. But we've done very well. The ministry has grown. We have several things going for us down there. Over the years, we have established many ministries within the community and within the church itself and within the fellowship. It's been a good ministry and has developed itself to be an influence. And with that, since we are so young, 1969 to now, not compared to 18s or early 19s, I'll turn over to Pastor Jacob. The other thing is we have several young men who've gone into full-time ministry. And Jacob was in my children's church at 7 years old, and that was an experience. That was, I guess, an experience. But he went on and became a pastor, and has been a pastor of a couple churches before ours, and came back to us. And Jacob, pick it up from there.
Well, I'm Jacob Kessling. I'm the teaching pastor at Community Grace Brethren Church, and I do take responsibility for part of his gray hair.
Him and his brother.
Yeah, my parents lived here in Sandler Avenue before I was even in grade school, and I remember my father-in-law, Woody, and Mel Garber knocking on our door, inviting us to the Chicken Church, inviting some community church, and I don't remember going the first week. My parents had told me when they went, they just felt in love. They felt welcomed, and people were attacking them. Come to our Sunday school class, and they got fully involved. My dad would dress up like a clown and do all kinds of acting stuff. My mom would sing, and just very involved in the church. And so Community Grace has a very special place in my heart. It was kind of part of my beginnings. I often was sitting out in the hallway by the water fountain because I talked too much. So Carl was one of the disciplinarians, whether it was a shoulder pinch, like I love you in the Lord, or what happened. But I'll tell you, it was just a great place to be. And in that time, there was just so many kids showing up. I remember riding the bus with Gene Pack, picking up a bunch of kids, and we'd get on the bus and get in trouble and there too. So so blessed to have community as a part of my life. I did want to mention, it's interesting as we're all talking about kind of what's happened in our churches, and typically we highlight all the good things, and there's been low times as well, and there's been ups and downs, and good people come and good people go, and people that we love, but they pass away or they move on, or leaders, they come and they go, and but in the midst of it all, you just find God is faithful, and He is protecting and providing everything we need to further the mission, and just such an interesting thing. And we currently have just been reorganizing things at the church and just wanting to be at a place where we can really be more intentional. So we exist to meet people where they're at and to help in the process of them becoming more like Jesus. And in the midst of that is evangelism and discipleship. And we really want to be a place where anybody can come and be loved. And I really believe that with Jesus Christ in their life, that life change can happen, that our past doesn't determine our future, that when you allow Jesus to come into your life, that everything can change. Marriages can change, hearts can change, forgiveness can take place. It's just a neat thing. So that to have the privilege to preach the gospel to people that are lost is such an amazing thing for me to do. I fell away from the church for a while as a young kid. My parents got divorced, and at 20 years old, I decided to come back to church, and I went back to community. I had such great memories of the place, and I didn't consider really going anywhere else. And so at 20 years old, I rolled in there on a Sunday night with my camouflage pants, spiked hair, earrings, and my motorcycle. And again, I felt loved, welcomed, invited someone, my now wife invited me and a few others to go to Applebee's afterwards. And God drastically changed my life. A dear friend of mine, Aaron Deal, took me, had me move in with him, and discipled me and loved me, taught me to pray, taught me to study Scripture, and in the process, went to Bible college, and God's been preparing me. In the midst of it all, the church has grown, and a lot of things happened in that season, and I was blessed to be part of that in the late 90s, to watch our church just flourish and fill. And I know we were running multiple services and such, and we built the new sanctuary, but to come back to something that was just so alive and thriving, and the relationships that you build along the way were so special to me. And I feel like at this point in time, I love to see a place where people can come together and build relationships and be intentional with one another, not just to have friends and casseroles together during Sunday school, but to dig into each other's lives and really figure out what's going on, what's under the layers, and what's going on in your marriage, and to be a place where we can be real with each other and realize we all come with problems and issues, but we have a perfect Savior who's gracious and who's forgiving and kind. And so we've been talking a lot about this idea that none of us really are good, but God is good. And we can come to church. We should be able to be real and be accepted in the midst of where we're at. I put down here that everyone is welcome and will be loved. Everyone will have an opportunity to hear the life-changing message of the gospel. We try to preach topically, and not that we're opposed to exegetical preaching, but I feel like we're trying to not only equip our believers in the church, but to create an inviting environment for those to come and to hear something that may be practical in their life and such. So we started these new processes. We had a lot of visitors coming in and out, as probably many of you have visitors every Sunday. And we just figured it's so hard for someone to get plugged in at times in churches that have such tight families and friends. And so we started a ministry called Starting Point, and that is introducing people to the Bible. We're finding more and more, probably as you guys are, that there's people coming to church that did not go to Sunday school when they were a kid. They have no clue any Bible story. They don't know who Jonah is, Moses, and we assume this all the time. And they're looking there like their eyes open, and they don't want to admit that they don't know. But we recognize this very thing's happening, so we started a class called Starting Point. It's 10 weeks long to introduce people to the Bible and what their purpose may be in the mission and what Christ has done in the church and how they can help and be part of that. And also new to community class as well. And we also realize that children play a huge role. I don't believe they're the church of tomorrow. I think that the children are the church of today, and I think that the importance of children, not just to draw parents in, but to invest in kids at an early age. I mean, there are so many verses I remember from my younger years when I wasn't kicked out of class. I remember them still. It's amazing what you soak in as a child, what you remember. And so we really want to invest in our kids. We also realize technology and times have changed tremendously. And so we really are trying to stay up in the time and not pull away from the message of the gospel at all, but to teach a practical truth of God's word, simple and engaging way that will help them really take steps forward in greater faith. And so we really try to do we have high energy worship for their kids with motions, and we do have some practical relevant teaching. We utilize video stuff. We do what we can to, it's not about holding their attention. I wish that we can sit and read the Word of God and allow it to really permeate with their life. It just finds that, we're fighting a battle, I can't win. I mean, I really want them to understand if it's just one truth, that maybe it's just God loves you. I mean, if that's all they go away with, I'm happy, So we're really trying to be more practical and relevant with these children and where they're at in their lives. And also, there's a lot more problems going on with them too. I mean, gosh, divorced homes is just a normal thing, and abandonment, and don't know who my dad is. I mean, there's really a lot of stuff that these kids are facing, and trying to be able to meet them again where they're at and be a loving environment where these kids can come in and maybe the parents aren't consistent, but the person at church who's showing them Christ's love is consistent and says, I love you, maybe gives them a hug or high five or whatever. Just consistency has been such a huge thing with these kids. And as we're doing Awanas is the same thing, and those the Awana program is another thing we do on Wednesday nights when the school year's in, and it's been a really great program as well. They sit around the table with the same leader, they're building relationships, they're studying God's Word, they're memorizing verses, which is awesome that you guys started it as well. And we have over 100 kids that show up every single Wednesday night, and it's crazy. It is madness. The organizational stuff is just crazy, but it is unbelievable how the kids, they love it. They love the awards. I don't care if we give them badges, patches. It doesn't matter to me. They're studying the Bible, and I really believe it has the power to change their life. And so we're doing the Awana program. And also this summer, our Bible school, I don't know how it started. I always remember going to it, and it was just such high energy and fun and screaming. I remember it was really kind of cool, the production that was put on when I was a kid. And because of the reputation of our church's Bible school, it's just, we've stayed consistently around 300 kids coming, and it's really great. However, we have recognized that the majority of the kids that come are churched kids, and we really have a heart to reach the lost. And so this year we're changing things up a little bit, and we're actually taking our Bible school on the road. And so we're stopping at 3 locations this year. We're going to be behind IGA on the June 7th, and then we're going to be at Mill Ridge and Union on July 12th, and then at West Mountain Park on August 2nd. And we're going to put on a 2-hour-long program, games, and all kinds of stuff, trying to draw people who wouldn't take their kids to church, but just to, again, pull them in, have some fun, and share the life-changing message of the gospel. And I'm praying for some great things to happen. I know God is amazing, and His heart is for the lost to be found. And so I'm excited to see what is going to take place here at Community Church. And I do, again, thank you for having us come.
Very well. Anybody else? Do you have anything else that you would like to say?
I think you really articulated what all of our churches are facing with our youth. This is a very much a changing area.
Yes.
And last statistics that I read, over half the county is unchurched.
Yes.
So it's the mission field
Yes,
right,
it is.
right near us.
One of the things I appreciate is the fact that all the churches in West Milton, or the majority of them, work together. And that's very unusual when you talk to somebody and you tell them that, the Catholic Church works with the Methodist Church and the Lutheran Church and all these, and they say, wow, hard to believe. But there's a lot of good work that goes through the community because of that.
I agree. Thank you all very, very much. It's been wonderful, very interesting, and we thank you for taking the time to come and tell us about the history and about the church and what you're doing. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.